Joe, one of the things that people like me look forward to in the month of June is that we're going to get some of the biggest decisions that the U.S. Supreme Court makes. They're routinely rolled out in June, unless, of course, there's a leaker that nobody, including the FBI, can actually find, like there was last year. But as we get into June, the Supreme Court is expected to announce its decisions in two cases that challenge all that nonsense about race-conscious admissions to college. So I thought we'd talk to Ken Tashjy, who is a campus reform higher ed fellow and a former general counsel for more than 20 years for about 15 different higher education institutions. Ken, welcome to the program.
Oh, Lars, thanks very much for having me.
Let's start with a basic question, and that is, should race at all be a factor, any factor, big or small, in deciding who gets into college and who doesn't?
My position is no, it should not be. When the court permitted the use of race about 20 years ago, it was narrowly limited to be considered as just a factor in admissions in higher education. But over the years, that's really morphed into a consideration of race to be a predominant or a determining factor, and it was never considered to be such. And I believe there are some real negative consequences as a result of the continued use of race in higher education admission. And I think it's going to weigh very heavily on the court moving forward in their determination that race is no longer going to be a factor, and they're going to move higher education in a different direction for purposes of admission decisions.
I mean, because if you allow it to be any factor, how do you avoid having it become the factor? In other words, if a given college, private or public, had two students in front of the college to, consider one or the other gets the slot in school. And they say, well, both the students are about equivalent in SAT scores, in all the other metrics you can use, like GPA and such, and maybe even the same in other extracurricular activities that the student's been involved in, like student government and things like that. But one is black and one is white. How do you avoid having that become the determining veto or affirmation of that student?
Well, one, you eliminate the use of race as part of that consideration, and you have to replace it with consideration of other factors, race-neutral factors. And we've got 9 states right now that have outlawed the use of race in higher education, as far back in one case as 1996. And those institutions boast strong diversity rates, but also maintain their academic competitiveness. And it can be done, and the focus has to shift away from the simple checking of a box on an application and fitting within the, quote, appropriate racial classification for admission purposes. And higher ed has to do a better job at analyzing individual applications, not just from a myopic or a singular viewpoint, but a much broader individualized assessment of how students are going to contribute to the educational environment. And that's going to mean they focus their shift to things, or refocus their shift to things like socioeconomic status and geographical status and or diversity, ideological diversity. Wouldn't it be nice to have some ideological diversity on our campuses?
I would love to see it in the faculty. I mean, because the last time I saw numbers, and I haven't seen anybody produce numbers in a while, but I saw one college where they had 300 faculty members and 8 of them were registered Republicans. And I'm willing to bet that most of those 8 were probably what I call country club Republicans or establishment Republicans rather than real conservatives. So you say you essentially have one ideological point of view on that college. Who in the world, sitting as a board of trustees member, says, oh, this is a good thing if we just have an entire campus faculty that only reflects one general point of view and the other point of view is not present at all? Does anybody think that's good?
Well, no, and I mean, I think you're exactly right on that point. And institutions, if they really are dedicated to diversity, then it must be a much more broader-based diversity and not just only exclusively limited to race of an individual student. It does a great deal of disservice, and it does nothing more than perpetuate racial stereotypes for college administrators to believe that they can predict the views and experiences of a student based only exclusively on their skin color. Skin color is never a predictor or a proxy for life experience. We need to form a much larger basis of analysis on issues of diversity, like economics, like regions of the country, like ideology, like experience, in place of, again, that singular focus on race. And it's ironic, we don't use race as a factor when hiring faculty and staff. We don't use it when awarding scholarships or financial aid. The high court's been very clear that students' race cannot be used when making elementary or secondary educational school assignments. So the question really is, why are we allowing race to be used in this one very narrow category of college admissions? And again, I think that's going to weigh very heavily in the decision of the court moving forward.
I'm talking to Ken Tashjy, who's a campus reform higher education fellow, although I might push back on one area when you say we don't use race or ethnic background in choosing faculty. I seem to remember Harvard being exceptionally proud of hiring Elizabeth Warren, the Native American, as she put herself on her bar registration card in Texas, and that she claimed that status. And Harvard said, oh, look at this. We've got the first Native American college professor at Harvard, I believe, or maybe the first female one. They were very proud of that. And it seems to me that did play a role in deciding to hire her.
Sure, but I'm going to assume Harvard's going to claim that they didn't base the decision on her race or national origin or alleged Indian heritage. But the reality is, if a decision of an institution, whether in hiring or in admissions, it has the purpose or effect of still seeking to create a racially proportionate student body, that still amounts to nothing more than racial balancing. The use of racial quotas, which is all illegal under federal law.
Yep.
So institutions are still going to have to be very, very cautious if they think they can, run a back end around the prohibition on the use of race with an effort to try to masquerade that as something else.
I want to see color-blind admissions. Bring in the students who show the best on the test scores. And if you want to bring economics into it, you can do that, but you can't do it as just a camouflage for using race instead. Ken Tashjy, former general counsel for 20 years at 15 different institutions of higher education. Ken, thanks very much for the time. Hey, if aging muscles and joints are slowing you down, do what I did. Lars,